All right, today we are going on an expedition. We're going to talk about something called grounded theory, which is basically a method for drawing a map when you're exploring brand new territory. Not a physical place, but the vast landscape of human experience.
So think about it. How do you map an unknown world? What if you're trying to understand something really complex, like what leadership is, or the day-to-day experience of living with a mental health issue, and there's just no good map that already exists? See, most research is about testing a map someone else already drew. This is about creating one from scratch.
So let's take a look at the method that these explorers of human experience actually use. This is section 1. What exactly is grounded theory? At its very core, grounded theory is a step-by-step process for building a theory that is literally grounded in data. Think of it less like a scientist in a lab with a hypothesis and way more like a detective showing up at a crime scene with absolutely no suspects. The theory is built clue by clue from the ground up.
And this method is perfect for solving certain kinds of mysteries. It's fantastic when you want to explain a phenomenon, like what really makes a leader effective, or to examine a deeply personal experience, like homelessness. It helps us understand the real actions and processes that make up human life.
But here's the thing. Before any explorer just heads out into the unknown, they've got to have the right mindset. And that brings us to our next section, all about how to prepare for this expedition.
And this gets to a really fundamental difference in how we see the world. The traditional positivist view, that's what most of us learn in science class. It treats a theory as something to be tested and measured. But the interpretivist view, and this is where grounded theory lives, it sees a theory as an abstract story that you build from the data. The goal is totally different. It's not to measure, it's to understand. Okay, so the first and maybe most important rule of this mindset is you have got to leave your old maps at home. You just can't draw a new map if you're constantly looking at an old one. Researchers have a word for this. They call it bracketing. It's about intentionally setting aside what you think you know so you can see the data with fresh eyes. Now, this isn't about being a total blank slate. That's impossible. As the pioneering researcher Kathy Charmaz said, the key is to make efforts to examine how your past influences the way you see the world and your data. So it's all about self-awareness, not a lack of experience. The other crucial practice is keeping a detailed explorer's journal. In grounded theory, these are called memos. And believe me, this is where the real thinking happens. You're not just taking notes, you're writing about your own thought process, you're defining your terms, and you're capturing all those incredible aha moments when the connections start to pop. Okay, so with the right mindset, now it's time to get out there into the field. Let's look at how a researcher actually goes about gathering their clues. The whole goal here is to gather rich data. That's the raw material for your map. And this usually happens in a few key ways. You can do intensive interviews, where you ask big, open-ended questions and then you just listen. Or observations, where you actually go into someone's world and take super detailed notes. You can even analyze documents and other artifacts to really understand the context. And this is why it's so powerful, because when you collect data firsthand, you're not getting a summary. As this says, you see the setting, observe interactions, witness nonverbal behavior, and hear their voices. You're getting the full, unfiltered story directly from the source. So now we've got all this rich, but let's be honest, probably pretty messy data. Interview transcripts, field notes, you name it. How do we turn all that into a map? Well, this brings us to the most methodical part of the journey, the coding process. This is how we find patterns in all that data. And this process happens in 3 really distinct stages. We start with what's called initial coding, then we move on to focus coding, and finally, we land on theoretical coding. So let's break down what each of these steps actually looks like. Stage 1, initial coding, is all about breaking the data down into tiny pieces. You're going through it line by line, almost with a magnifying glass, looking for any actions, events, or processes. You're basically labeling every single little thing you see. And here's a really fascinating trick that's often used in this phase. Coding with gerunds. That's a verb plus ing. So instead of labeling something pain, a researcher might code it as managing pain. Instead of just decision, becomes making informed decisions. This tiny shift keeps the entire focus on action and process. It's a game changer. And why does this little change matter so much? Well, according to Kathy Charmaz, we gain a strong sense of action and sequence with gerunds. It makes the data feel dynamic. It's all about what people are doing. In stage 2, focused coding, your perspective shifts.
After labeling everything up close, the researcher zooms out. They look at all those initial codes, pick out the most significant or frequent ones, and start grouping them into larger categories. This is where the continents and oceans of your map really start to take shape.
And finally, we get to stage 3, theoretical coding. This is where you connect all the dots. You take your big categories and you figure out how they all relate to each other to form one cohesive story, an explanation of the whole process you're studying. This is where you draw the roads and the rivers connecting all the different regions of your map.
And all of this careful work leads to the final phase, building your theory. This is the big moment, when the map is finally complete.
So, how do you know when you're actually done? Well, the key concept is called saturation. This is the point where collecting new data doesn't really teach you anything new. Instead, it just confirms the categories and the connections you've already mapped out. So it's not about running out of people to talk to, it's about the map itself being complete and solid. And reaching that point is a really active process. You don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. Theoretical sampling means seeking pertinent data to develop your emerging theory. You're constantly looking for new information, specifically to test and refine the map you're drawing, making sure every part of it holds up until it's rock solid.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty profound final question. If a rich, complex theory can be built directly from people's own words and actions, what does that reveal about the nature of truth itself? What does it really mean when the map isn't just a guide to the territory, but it's a direct reflection of it? That's something to think about.